Hey everybody, welcome back to Hart Talks. So as you can see, I've got a guest here today, and I always use that joke about coming into my bedroom, there's lights, there's cameras, it always looks like a porn set. Well, this is Jason Domino, who knows about those things. So Jason is a sex worker, but he's here to talk today about conversion therapy. So Jason, thank you for being on Hart Talks.
Thank you very much for having me. Absolutely, I'm from the porn industry, sex worker in person, all of these sorts of things. But I'm really happy to share some of my experiences and get into the details of conversion therapy.
I think I need to know more about it, and I think that it's a subject that unless you've been through it or you know somebody that's been through it, that you might not know a lot about. So for those people, Jason, that don't know what conversion therapy is, could you give us a brief rundown?
Sure. So conversion therapy, in essence, is the belief that you can change someone and their sexuality, their sort of sexual orientation, through a set of principles or practices, again, to sort of manipulate and change how they are. So how that often looks is a bit of pseudoscience dressed up and therapy to try and make someone actually be attracted to different groups of people. Like that's the core of it. It's kind of it's a weird one because there's a lot of different shapes of it. Different people encounter it in different ways, and we'll get into some of that detail in just a moment.
As I hear you describing it, it just sounds madness. You know, the thought of trying to change somebody from who they are and what they are. It just seems, Now, could you tell us, Jason, a bit about your journey with conversion therapy?
Absolutely. So I went through conversion therapy. I was still, a lot of the time people think of conversion therapy for like very young people, but I was still around sort of 19, 20, around that sort of age. So I still very much was dealing with a lot of that like later on in life. And it actually seems to be quite a common situation that people are in that sort of age range where they go through that. Although the stories that people talk about often are more focused on when people are like 16, 17, that type of age range. But for me, I grew up in a very religious household. So very Church of England. I'm based in the UK, grew up in the UK. I'm half American, but I grew up here. Some people are surprised to think that conversion therapy still happens even in the UK. And again, it's because people don't talk about it. And the organizations that do conversion therapy tend to be within shells, so they're owned potentially by church and religious institutions, but they tend to be a separate entity themselves.
So I know in 2018 there was an announcement by the government saying that it was going to be banned, or that they were going to get rid of conversion therapy. Where are we now in 2022?
So the fight is still going on because there's been a load of watering down of that particular commitment. And so there's been plenty of campaign work. So ban conversion therapy is a great sort of, even if you look for hashtags of that, then you'll find the campaigns that are out there where people are pushing back against this attempt to water down the commitment. They're trying to say that by getting rid of conversion therapy, it is only getting rid of like forced conversion therapy. And we'll get into some of that in a second, because most conversion therapy doesn't look like someone physically dragging someone to a center and saying, okay, sit down and we are going to put you through some awful therapy. A lot of it actually is a bit more coercive than that. So it's a slow build-up of ideas of, for example, if you're gay, then you're going to be going to hell as an abomination side of things, to the point where the person actively is choosing to go to these to go to this abuse, to go to this conversion therapy, because it is abuse, it isn't actually therapy. So the way that it's been watered down wouldn't necessarily protect people from going to conversion therapy, because they are still choosing to go there. So it doesn't have any space for that sort of background of building people get there.
Yeah.
There's also watering down when it comes to like the religious aspects of it and trying to slowly just water it out as if conversion therapy was really happening without that context, and that's what's being targeted. Whereas all of this sits within wider societal prejudices, like often from the religious communities, mostly from the religious communities against homosexuality and sometimes also against transgender people. It's being watered out that way.
So can you tell us some of the things that go on in, the different types of conversion therapy that there are?
Conversion therapy is like a whole spectrum. Conversion therapy is a whole spectrum. It can be the simple practice of this person comes into a room and everyone starts praying for them to change their sexuality, and maybe standing around them and saying that, just saying, if you pray hard enough, then you'll be able to change. Or whether it's the idea of like, we're going to cast out a demon from you, we're going to cast out this gay demon or this gender change demon inside you. And often that'll be worded with things like same-sex attraction. It'll be worded with ways to package the issue and as an issue, as a sin,
right,
that can then be addressed with the right amount of atonement. So there's that end of the spectrum, and that's one of the bits that people are trying to water out because they're like, that's less harmful.
Yeah.
Although there's so much trauma in that specifically.
In itself.
And then the other parts of the conversion therapy is where it gets a bit more like physical, or a bit more, and this is where we're talking about a bit more, perhaps closer to like forced conversion therapy.
Yeah.
So what I went through was I chose myself I would look at images of erotic material that I found attractive, and I would drink like a cocktail of like toxic like liquids that would make me retch. And so I would try and build an association between the two things. And I would suggest anyone who's listening to this, it doesn't work. Don't even start going down this direction, because literally all it does is give you trauma to have to work through later on in life. But building the association. So that isn't necessarily about being preyed on to change. I was encouraged by a conversion therapy center to look at doing this and to blend the ideas of what's known as operant conditioning, which is sort of popular in films like Clockwork Orange, these sorts of ideas, this whole thing of like building negative sensations with ideas. Yeah. So that's kind of where that type of conversion therapy. Some people might be doing some forms of self-harm, or if we're looking further back in history, if we're looking at things like how the Nazis were using electrotherapy to people, potentially in connection with looking at erotic material to try and connect the two sensations, so that idea of sexuality, how malleable is it? How much can it be changed? And there was no space there to look at it without this, like, homosexuality is inherently wrong. Like, that's where the whole premise of all of this was looked at. It's looked at, there is something wrong with people who are gay, or their, their gender isn't aligned in the way that they are expressing, and these sorts of things. There was no space for any of that at all. It's just that this is a problem. How do we fix it? The context of all of that means there's no space for learning. It's the confirmation bias within the whole idea that has to be there has to be solutions that we can reach. It should say in itself how unscientific the whole process is, but there's been a long history of people going down this direction, and most of the people involved are actually people who've been dealing with their sexuality themselves. So a lot of the time the desperation to try and change has been something that's encouraged people to actually further the practice.
Yeah. It's amazing how deceptive it sounds, and especially with the religious side of it, where religion is supposed to be good, and and faith and honor, and trust and everything, but where conversion therapy comes in, it sounds as if it's trying to convince you that about sin, about being wrong, about and making you feel as if you're wrong. It's kind of flipping the coin, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. There was no darker time in my life than during that time. The idea for me back then that I would feel happy and lighter and freer as myself now, and I'm a gay sex worker and working in porn, and the idea that my soul feels freer. And I still find the concept of soul still a very ambiguous one, but there's something that feels better and righter and more just in contrast to following all of the boxes that have been made around me in that time back then. It just wouldn't have computed.
You spoke about, about feeling desperate and how, suicide attempts and actual suicides or self-harm in people that have been through conversion therapy is quite a big thing, isn't it? Did you have any thoughts of that? Did you have friends that that thought that?
There's a lot of people who've gotten close to that after going through conversion therapy. I'm someone who believes in this idea of blue mist. So you've got red mist, which is the idea of given the right situation, the right circumstances, anyone could potentially murder someone because they've gotten to the point where they are angry enough or whatever it is enough. It's the idea that you're not just someone who's born into that situation, it can be nurtured in. I'm someone who kind of believes, I guess, a little bit in this idea of blue mist, that anyone could get to the point of considering suicide given the situation.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
You don't have to have, it's not a biological nature factor. There's actually enough nurture there that someone could say, this is not the pathway that I'm happy enough in.
Yeah.
And I want out. So I would say conversion therapy has been the time where I felt most blue mist. And I've never made attempts to go through that, but the reasons why I stopped my attempts with conversion therapy was because I knew that my blue mist was getting strong enough that there was no other path that I could take.
Yeah.
So I knew that I had to come to terms with the fact that I was gay, and even if it upset my family and my feelings at the time were, well, my community around me would reject me, my family would potentially reject me, I would be on my own, and the feelings of isolation and being alone, particularly as a queer person, already condensed sort of traumas that I already was experiencing from growing up in a cis hetero world to begin with. All of that meant that it was really difficult pathway to let myself get to.
Yeah.
To say, okay, I'm going to go down this pathway of being an openly queer, comfortable gay person. I felt like I had to try every other option to the extremes, including this conversion therapy, before I'd be like, okay, I can be gay. Okay, I'll deal with it.
Can I ask you, Jason?
Which is absurd looking back now.
Yeah, I know when you look back
so
on
much
it.
joy in this pathway that I just couldn't even have computed.
Was there a time when you thought that conversion therapy would work? Or was it just that you were so desperate to not be gay? Or was it the people around you that were desperate for you not to be? Was it something that you at one point thought, okay, I'll give this a go and maybe it'll work? Or was it something you kind of felt pushed into?
I'd say it was a complex mixture of feelings where some days you feel like I'm going to push myself into this to know that I've tried, and some days you fake it till you make it. You 100% believe that it's going to work. So part of your brain already knows that chemically, or romantically, chemically, naturally, you are a certain way, but you bury that as deep as you can to the point where you believe as strong as you can believe in anything that the conversion therapy is going to work, because you're hoping that it's going to work, that everything, like your future, your ideas and your plans for your future have depended on it working.
Right.
Because if that doesn't line up, then what does that mean for all of your plans, for your identity, for what you've thought you're going to go down?
So if there's people out there that want to do something to help, what can be done to, what is the things that we can do to say, okay, I'm making an effort to make sure conversion therapy isn't something that we have here in the UK or actually anywhere in the world. But I know there are certain countries that don't have it, but there's a lot of places that do, isn't there? So what can be done?
Absolutely. So I would say get involved with the activism that's happening to ban conversion therapy. So even ban conversion therapy with a hashtag, you'll get to see a number of different campaigns that are already starting that way. A lot of them are asking you to write to your MPs to make sure people are understanding that conversion therapy isn't just within the context of people being forced, or even sometimes what's called as corrective rape, which tends to be more
I
how
was reading about that. Yeah.
more women are in one part of the spectrum being treated. So that's still in the conversion therapy spectrum. It's all the way up to being prayed for that you will change. Because if you don't have the entire spectrum of conversion therapy there, then you still have the trauma, and you still have enough pretext that conversion therapy attempts of harsher levels can be hidden underneath it. It's not all someone being dragged by the hand. Sometimes people do choose. I chose it myself. And I was self-harming. It was through liquids, and I was causing myself mental trauma. But I didn't necessarily know it at the time, because I wanted it to work in every way that I could.
And you're being told, aren't you, from those around you, you know, that you have to do this, and this will make you better. Make you better.
So I contacted my church and I said, I want to change. Do you know somewhere where I could go for that? And they sent me the details for this organization that's funded from America, but it's still based in the UK. And it teaches how to do some of this. And it actually teaches this idea of, you know, it says, okay, well, you've had bad father figures in your life, and you feel like you can't become one of those men. You feel like you have to be with one of those men. So it paints pseudoscience on top of all of this. And if you're already struggling, you're really susceptible to some of these ideas.
Yeah,
it starts to look like it makes sense. There's no space for you to say, actually, I am wonderfully human exactly how I am. Like, that's just taken off the table, which
completely.
And that's part of the problem with all of it. And some of that stuff isn't included within the current attempts to water down. Like, they're trying to water down the ban of conversion therapy. It doesn't even give space to ban that, because someone has chosen to go in there. It's most frustrating.
Just lastly, to ask you about trauma, because obviously you don't you wouldn't come out of something like that without having some trauma. What was it for you? How do you think it showed itself for you? You know, the after effects of conversion therapy.
It took me a long time to understand how I wanted to have sex, how I enjoyed sex, how I would let myself be free to listen to the wants of my body. And I think people who are considering things like conversion therapy need to consider the amount of time that it might take in order to process some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not care because they hate that particular part of the future. But if that's something that they're thinking about, then I would say, what harm is there potentially taking a sabbatical from their faith? If it's their faith that is causing them to consider these things, have a sabbatical, have a pray, and ask the voice that you consider to be God, whether there is a problem with you having a sabbatical, just to understand more about your body, and that potentially helping evolve your relationship with your faith. For me, that was my journey. I started with praying about that, and the space that I considered to be God, or considered to be God at the time, didn't have a problem with me taking a sabbatical, and that conflicted with everything that I thought of as my faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that gave me enough space to explore and to learn more about who I was as well. And I would say that's the first starting points of healing. And I would say that's the first points where you can start to address some of the trauma that all of this is starting to lay down.
It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Just hearing you talk about it, it makes me go, wow. You know, there's so much still that needs to be done, isn't there?
Well, there's one last thing that really needs to be covered with this, I guess, which is a lot of the time the organizations that are doing this are doing it under the like hat of framing it as sex addiction and framing it as porn addiction. So saying that someone they're not gay or transgender, that they are a sex addict.
Yeah.
That actually it's another way of trying to put these topics into sin and then talk about treating. And that's how they do that. So really be aware and careful when you see people talking about sex addiction, because there's still enough space where people are worried about that and don't observe that sometimes it's actually just a front for conversion therapy practices going on. Because people might be having more sexual attraction than they're comfortable with, or using porn more than they're comfortable with. But that doesn't mean that isn't what is natural for their body as an individual. Like, it could be that what they perceive as like too much sex is actually what their body is wanting, and that's just how their body is, and that's okay
for them.
It's those conversations that need actually to be looked at, because currently there's a little bit more traction for sort of sex addiction ideas than people don't even necessarily connect the conversion therapy practices with. They are still existing as businesses through the sex addiction conversation.
So much. Jason and I have been talking, and it just brings up so many other things that I feel we need to talk about, you know, and we'll maybe do that in another video. But Jason, thank you for coming and sharing this with us, because I think it was important for me to learn, but it's also important for my viewers to know more about conversion therapy, because it's important. So having people like you talking about it and being out there and just being you, you know, I Jason, we definitely need to talk about how you got to you in another video. we need to, I think that will be a video in itself, you know, but because I think that you being where you are and doing what you're doing and everything now, I just think you should be very proud of yourself.
Oh, thank you. I feel like the inclusive mosques and rainbow churches and inclusive synagogues and all of these sides of things is also a really important thing for people to engage with, to know that people can still maintain their faith. If that's really like that can be important to so many people, and you can still carry that forward. There's many different interpretations of the same scripture without changing the scripture in any way. It's just about how you look at some of those details and how you want to take the learning from the same passage in ways that actually welcomes you as an individual, whether you're gay, whether you're transgender. Like, there's plenty of ways of looking at these same same scriptures and still giving you space, and that's a really healthy place to go to. And I think that's an important thing as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have, if you've had any experiences of conversion therapy, if you have any questions for Jason, please put them in the comment section below. I will make sure he gets them. And just keep being you, because you are wonderful. True, isn't it? You're just
absolutely. Thank you.
We're wonderful as we are. Okay, everybody, take care. See you later.